Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Doty, and I'm the host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Hi, this is Dr. Jim Doty, host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast. My guest today is Lara Love Hardin, who actually is a close friend. But the reason I'm having her on the podcast today is because of her new memoir, The Many Lives of Mama Love. And while today she is CEO of her own literary agency, and previously she had been co-CEO of award-winning literary agency Idea Architects, she has a much more profound and deeper story, which starts with the troubled childhood and ultimately spiraling down into identity theft, addiction, and redemption. I hope you enjoy our podcast today. Thanks for listening. Well, Lara, it's great to have you with me. I did a little bit of an intro before we began here, but it's really an honor, and congratulations on your new book, The Many Lives of Mama Love. And just to recap a little bit, it's really quite an extraordinary journey you've been on. I mean, now you're CEO of your own literary agency. You were co-CEO of Idea Architects, which is a very prominent agency in the field. And what many people don't realize, though, like each and every one of us, we have a backstory. Now, before I go forward, I have to also acknowledge that Lara and I actually have known each other for some time. And when she was at Idea Architects, she was actually instrumental in the success of my own book. She collaborated with me, maybe ghost wrote with me. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, the success of my book, in great part, had to do with the contributions from Lara. But this time around, she's telling her own story. And like each and every one of us, we all have a backstory that made us who we are today. And Lara, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your childhood. And I know escape is a big word that is often used when you talk about your childhood. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Thank you, Jim. It's really nice to be on this podcast with you. I thought you were going to say everybody has secrets, which is another part of my story, but everybody has a backstory. The first line of my book is reading was my first addiction. But really what my first addiction was escape. And I didn't have the greatest childhood. It was marked with a lot of addiction and violence and chaos. And so my earliest way of coping with that was to escape into books, into my imagination. And so I read desperately from a really early age, and I kind of hid in my room and hid into books. And I think that was, my gateway drug to writing, you could say.
Well, though, as you go on with your story, it's sort of interesting because seemingly, though, you could merge yourself into or connect with various, if you want to call it, popularity groups growing up, whether it was the athletes, whether it was the nerds. But oftentimes, that's not necessarily your true self, but it's a mask you learn to carry to get you through or be accepted for the thing you crave most, right? Maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah. I mean, really, I learned to be a chameleon really early on, and could adapt myself to whatever group I was with. And mostly it was because I tried to assimilate into other people's families. I needed to get to a family dinner somewhere. And so I learned to kind of be whoever anyone wanted or needed me to be. And, the risk that goes along with that is that you don't end up becoming yourself or even knowing who that is, right? And, with my family, like my focus growing up was always on school and education. And, I thought education meant inoculation. Like if I could like out educate myself from a traumatic childhood or addiction or any of the things I was growing up around, and that didn't prove to be the case. But yeah, I think that early assimilation into other people's lives helped me in collaborative writing, certainly.
So how did you, if you will, jump from the escape of reading, or maybe it's not a how to, but what happened to you? You obviously know how to do that, and whether it was food, sex, or ultimately heroin, was it to keep trying to escape and not feel the pain?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was definitely a not feeling the pain. And for me, I was a late bloomer into my addiction, really. And part of it is I went to college and graduate school for writing, but then I stopped writing for a good 10 years. And writing was really like how I processed my emotions and made sense of the world. And I think when I stopped doing that in writing, I had to sort of mask it and cope with it another way. I didn't grow up in a family where we had a language for emotions. Like, how was your day? How are you feeling? That was just not the vocabulary. So I found myself in my first marriage. I had 3 children under the age of 4.5. And my husband was cheating on me. And I remember, back then, pain medication was how this started. Pain medication was kind of given out in like, sample packs. You go to the dentist, childbirth, and I remember, I had an earache or something, and I took a pain pill, and I was like, oh, I can pretend I'm happy with this. Like the way it worked in my brain, I was like, oh, everything's okay. And I can just pretend I'm happy and, pretend that my marriage is okay and that things, it just helped me pretend. And, I had a predisposition to getting addicted to things. And, that same feeling of false well-being that it gave me, then it took 2, then it took, X number of, until at the end I was taking 60 pain pills a day. And functioning, like we could have a conversation. And I really thought like I needed that that I was, smarter, funnier, brighter, more connected to people. It was really like, I thought it gave me a way to connect with people when it was actually doing the opposite. And then, the nature of addiction, it progresses, and I ended up smoking heroin.
When all this was going on, had you already started, if you will, committing crime?
Well, not in the way that the book, not in the way that got me into jail, but like, to get that many pain pills a day, I don't know if it was, there's lots of shady doctors in Florida who would mail them to you, which I'm sure wasn't legal, and, was nothing I was prosecuted for, but, there were ways to get them that weren't quite legal, but, it was really the heroin that sort of blew up my life and used up all my money, and then I resorted to stealing from my friends and my neighbors.
It's interesting because you were saying how you were taking 60 Vicodin a day and you were functioning. And I think what so often we forget, though, is that when we're engaged in assuaging our own pain, oftentimes we're not really seeing how others are suffering, either suffering because of our actions, but also people who externally appear to be fine, yet they're suffering a great deal. And I think, that's this idea of fear of being judged in the sphere of actually showing your emotions so that people can connect with you. Maybe you can comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me. I was just talking to someone this morning, a friend, and I was like, about that time, like I was so afraid to be vulnerable or to like admit that I didn't have it all together, that I needed help. And I remember saying, God, I could never like go away for 30 days. Like that would be impossible to do, and be away from my children and my life and go get help or go to rehab. That was the story. And you know, because I couldn't do that, couldn't imagine that something far worse happened. But, I just was embarrassed by my emotions. Like, I don't know where I learned this, but like my own emotional world was embarrassing to me. It felt weak to me. And I just didn't have that. Like when you desperately want connection and someone to see you, but you're like, I don't know how to, I don't know how to say how I'm feeling or be that vulnerable. I could do it in writing, but I couldn't, I'm a much better writer than talker. That's what I know to be true. But yeah, it's scary being that vulnerable.
Well, I think it's interesting because when you and I began working together, I was not aware of your background, but I'm sure that some of my own narrative sort of you could easily relate to.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to it. And, you weren't aware because I was deathly afraid to tell anyone about my past and scared they would find out. But I definitely related to your childhood and your family stories. And it was easy for me to see the world through your childlike eyes, your eyes of you as a child, for sure.
No, and I think that's one of the things that makes you, a great writer is that you do have that ability to sort of connect with, get through to, in some ways, the burdens that all of us carry with us, this baggage that has traumatized so many of us and created this narrative of shame.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find fascinating, and I'd love your comment on this because I think it's the case with you, you don't appreciate, I think, how much people care about you, uh, and you don't appreciate how forgiving people are if you're honest.
Right, right. I mean, I definitely learned, I took far too long to learn, like over a decade, that no one had as little compassion for me as I had for myself. No one was as unforgiving of me or as judgmental or as critical than I was of myself. But it took me far too long to learn that, And when I was working with you, and you're such a compassionate human and all this compassion, and like I could understand it intellectually and I could have that for other people, but like turning that inward, I had no skill set for that at all.
Well, and again, obviously, that's one of the things I've spent a lot of time trying to do. I won't say I'm 100% successful. I don't think anyone is. But that being said, for so many people who are in the same position, we find that we're so mean to ourselves and so critical. But I think the challenge is when we're that mean to ourselves, we have a tendency to look at the world through a different lens. And maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always someone who is, hyper vigilant and on guard and like waiting, you know, I don't know if it's my childhood or, getting arrested and going to jail, but I'm always on this verge of like, what am I in trouble for? Like, am I in trouble? When's the other shoe gonna drop? So that's something I had to do a lot of work to unlearn and to learn to like receive that love from people and that the nice things they say. It's so much easier for me to like hang on to the bad things, right? Or the critical things. And it's been a long decade of undoing that and trying to sort of receive, like I think when I told you about my past or a little bit of my childhood, I mean, you were so kind and understanding and compassionate. But, there's always that part in my head. It's like, but does he know the real story? Or it doesn't, there's just always, it can't just be great sometimes, so.
Laura, you were, telling me about this list of comments that you had received when this newspaper article came out calling you the neighbor from hell. What happened to you, or how did you feel when you read all of those comments? And also, did you believe it was true?
I read them. I already felt, horrible about where I was. I was in jail. I'd lost everything and everyone who made up who I was. My children, my home, my work. Like I was a number. I was an inmate number. And I was sentenced, and I saw a cameraman in the courtroom, and I was trying to hide and cover my face and just and there's an angry mob, and it was horrible. It was a horrible, dark time, and so the article came out, and I remember it was breakfast in jail, and the guard hands me a newspaper. Now, I didn't pay or subscribe to a newspaper. You have to, you have to be a little fancy in jail to get a newspaper delivered to you. And he hands it to me, and I was like, oh, this is my paper. And he goes, oh, it is today. And there was my picture on the cover with that headline. And I was mortified and, subject of a lot of jokes from the guard. And then people started calling me the neighbor from hell. The guards did. My jail nickname was Mama Love, so the women didn't call me that. But when I just read the article, I skimmed it and then I put it away because there's a lot of things that weren't quite true in it, but some of it was true. And I didn't think anything of it. I don't have a computer to get online in jail. But then when those comments came, I remember opening them. And it was there's probably 300 comments. So it was like a big stack of pages. And I just read each one. So I felt hurt. I felt ashamed. I felt a lot of fear because there were people saying on there oh, she didn't get a long enough sentence, and then other people saying, well, there's ways to get people put back in jail when they get out, or she'll get hers on the street. A lot of threats, and I was scared, and I also just thinking my children are going to read all this, and my children are seeing this. My son Ty was in junior high, and he said that newspaper was in every single classroom he went in that day. And I get news is news, but I don't think public humiliation is a great first step towards rehabilitation for anybody. But mostly I was just worried that my children were getting, some were teenagers, and my youngest was very young, but they were teenagers, and this was being seen by their friends and their parents' friends, and so I was ashamed about what people were writing, but mostly ashamed of the collateral damage to my children. It was already bad enough what happened, getting arrested, and now this just added to that, and it was demoralizing. And I was luckily I was in a little bit a stronger place emotionally and mentally than I was when I first got to jail. When that article came, if it had happened, when I was arrested, my youngest son was almost 4, and he was the only one home at the time. My son Caden, my other boys were at school, and so when the sheriffs came and the chaos was happening in the house, I begged them to let me call a family member, a friend, to come get my son, and they called Child Protective Services instead, and he got taken away, and I still get emotional about this. So when I was arrested and taken to the jail, the whole time I was crying and asking where my son was, and the sheriff's deputy turned to me and said, "You'll never see him again, and you should not be anybody's mother." And so that moment was just I was okay, I'm just bad. I just felt this badness, and a couple nights later just really believed that I had failed at life, and redemption is great for other people, but it's not for me, and I decided to end my life. So if that article had come at that time, I would have tried again, probably, honestly.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, I didn't mean to get heavy on you. No. I didn't mean to make my own self cry.
Well, look, you've known me long enough. I'll cry at Lassie.
Yeah, you'll cry at anything.
Right. But the sad statement about it is that but for the grace of God go I. But the lack of kindness or empathy or understanding. I don't know, as an example, anyone who wishes to be addicted to narcotics or any type of drug. I don't know anyone, frankly, who wants to be poor, or to do actions that cause harm either to themselves or others. But the fact of the matter is we're all human beings, and if you look at each of us completely, there are good parts, there are bad parts. That I think one of the challenges for so many people, though, is the shame that we all carry. People try to push it away, and you really actually, it's not possible. And when you're weakest, when you're tired, when you're exhausted, that shame or that part of you that you dislike about yourself comes out and bites you, versus recognizing that these things are part of every human being, and we have to learn to deal with them and accept ourselves, the good and the bad. And hopefully the reality is that the good outweighs the bad, which certainly I think is the case with you.
Thank you.
I wanted to make a comment, and I think this will relate to one of the projects you're involved with. Is sadly, as we see with so many people, if you will, with so many people piling up on you, that you recognize that prison is not a place of redemption. It's a place that takes away your dignity and causes you to lose hope. And maybe you can comment on that from, obviously, your own personal experience.
Yeah. I mean, it is, I think, especially for women, which is what I can really speak to, like, prisons weren't designed for women. They were built for men originally. And, if you were to look at a list of, like, what are the red flags for domestic violence, or, like, a partner is going to be controlling or abusive, it is exactly the list of what the power structure is in jail for women. It's men controlling who you have access to, controlling your food, controlling your phone calls, controlling your freedom. So it was a really, I was in jail with girls, so young, like barely older than my children in many ways, and many of them. And so many of them were in jail for interpersonal relationships, boyfriends who were drug dealers, a lot of substance abuse, a lot of trauma. And it wasn't a very trauma-informed place in that way. And maybe it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be to punish you. But so it was, it was not a hopeful place in that way, but it was a hopeful place in that, like, what I found is, like, people will make a family wherever they are. Right. And when I was detoxing in jail, like, women who I didn't know were not family, you don't think you're in a culture of caring, like, really comforted me and saved me, and, like, made hot water bottles from the hot pot, and, like, really helped me survive in jail, and really saved me in a way when I was at my lowest. And then, I don't know if you know this, but I actually started ghostwriting in jail. Like, that's where I honed my craft, because I started writing letters for these women. 80% of women in jail are mothers. And I started writing letters for them to get passes to go to high school graduations or to a funeral, or, because you get a little brief pass. Or to break up with someone or seduce someone else. I was just ghostwriting these letters, and I was like, God, I'm like, everything I wrote for them, I'd write to their judges, and they would get their pass, or they'd get put in long-term treatment instead of prison. But I'll tell you, the one time I wrote a letter for myself to get a pass to my oldest son's high school graduation, because I was in jail during my oldest son's high school graduation. it got declined. So I was like, oh, I'm better at writing for other people than writing as me, right? Like was like, later on that judge did tell me, he said, I denied your pass so you'd never miss another one. But,
yeah.
Whatever. No.
What can you say to that?
Yeah.
But so tell me about the project that you've started and regarding women in prison.
Yeah. So I co-founded a nonprofit with Cynthia Chase, who was a former mayor of Santa Cruz, and she lives up in Oakland. It's called the Gemma Project, and it is going to provide a 10-week programming for women while they're in custody, and quarterly, and reentry services when they get out, because that's a whole other issue that I had no idea, and I think a lot of people don't. Like, I thought, okay, I'm gonna punish me for what I did, and I will serve my sentence, I will pay restitution, I will do my probation, and then I'll be done paying. And the reality is that you're often not done paying ever, and generations can pay. And so reentry is a maze of bureaucracy and like illogical things, with 3 counties wanting different things from you at the same time and not coordinating, and makes it really easy to go back to jail. And even this morning I woke up and it was publication. I was having a dream, and it was publication day, and the police were at my house, and they were going to arrest me. And I was like panicking. I still have that like anxiety and fear, which is, trauma response. Because as much as it was, okay, it wasn't okay. It wasn't really, like, I can say it was supportive of family, but it was, it took me a long time to kind of acknowledge the trauma of my arrest and jail and all of that, because I was like, well, I caused that myself. So like, you're not allowed to heal from trauma you cause yourself. That was my misguided thinking. So anyway, the nonprofit's going to provide those reentry services and support, which is really, a lot of times recidivism is just, you can't, you have to have a job for probation, but then you have to drug test and 2-hour notice for probation. And so you need a job where you can leave, and you don't have childcare because you have a record. And there's no subsidies. So it is like recidivism is a lot of times lack of support rather than like ongoing criminal behavior. And so we're doing that. And then we're trying to replicate the Gemma program model. And I did the early version of the Gemma program, the original Gemma program, when I was incarcerated. So we're trying to replicate that across the country in the 3,116 jails, the majority of which women are in jail. And, it's kind of divided half and half between jail and prison. But, jails now with different laws, at least in California, you can stay there for 3 years. You can be sentenced for 3 years. Originally, they were meant to be a holding place. And so they're not really geared up with programming and services and options like prisons are. They're not meant for long-term stays. And so a lot of women are staying there long-term and suffering from it. So, and then we want to do some policy advocacy and change, because the laws are crazy, and the barriers that we create for people for life when they're, we punish them for life for whatever, whoever they are at their worst, right? I could write a book with some Stanford professors, like the Designing Your Life guys, but I can't homeschool my child because I have a criminal record. So.
Well, and I think the sad thing is that you have a lot of misinformed politicians who, on the one hand, you have the law and order set who, they got what they deserve type of attitude, and with very, very little empathy. It was interesting during the 2007 and 2008 meltdown. Prior to this, you had, again, the same group of people who said, people are leeches. They just want to be on welfare. They don't want to work. It's their own fault. We shouldn't give them anything. They're already getting too many benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And then many of these people suddenly had no job, and they suddenly get a feeling of what it's really like for the average person, where you're struggling, and these problems go so much deeper. Whether you're a male or a female, I mean, getting out after years in jail with zero support services and all these requirements, you have to be in these different places. How is that even possible that you can do that? Especially if you don't necessarily have connections, resources, money, and and then it just is another excuse to escape again, because the reality is so painful.
Yeah. And, and adding on to that list you gave is just the stigma and shame on top of it, which is, it's hard to, advocate for yourself when you're in that place. It's hard to talk about why you're qualified. Like, I think, people who have been incarcerated might make the best employees in some situations. Like, they know crime doesn't pay. They have something to prove. They just want to work hard. The first job I got after I got out of jail and I was still on probation was working, administering this grant that helped place women with minor children in jobs in the community. And so I would go and tell these potential employers, and some are more, open than others, like, no, they have so much to lose. Like, everything's on the line. Like, you become grateful for minimum wage. Trust me. That is one thing in jail, like losing everything. Like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, I gotta like do the dishes. And I think, well, at least I'm doing the dishes, like, not for 500 inmates, like I'm doing my own dishes. And so, like, it is amazing what a perspective shift jail was for me, and a gratitude shift in that way. And I think that people who have lost everything and been at rock bottom, like, they just need a chance. They just need someone to believe in them, and they blossom into that,
Well, no, I think that's exactly right. I think we came up with a quote in my book that said everyone deserves a second chance.
Yeah. Sometimes a third.
Yes.
Fourth.
No.
Yeah. All the chances. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, probably at some point it gets a little old, but
yeah, but
maybe for the first 3 or 4.
Yeah,
but,
maybe 3. Let's just go for 3, just to be safe.
But it is, when somebody's had their dignity taken away, and I've spoken at many prisons, is, my view is that prison is not filled with bad people. Prisons are filled with people who didn't get the love and nourishment and care, and it's so critical, especially in early life. And then, to somehow think with the present incarceration system that you're going to give them what they need to thrive as a human being, that's what's so sad. And yet you look at other countries like Norway as an example, they're actually closing prisons because it's not an effective strategy.
Right. Yeah. So we should be like Norway.
Well, there are many other countries we should strive to be like, it's interesting because there's this narrative that somehow the old days were better, but there were never any old days that these people remember from their imagination, and that's what's so sad. But I think all of us should strive to be better than we were yesterday, or better human beings. And I think that is the challenge.
Yeah, for sure.
So I remember 2 aspects from our friendship, but one was how you got into stand-up comedy, which is sort of an interesting thing. Mm-hmm. How did that, though, ultimately relate to you being able to stand up and give a TEDx talk about your truth?
Well, I started with, I went to an improv comedy class, which was something I've always wanted to do. I was terrified. Like, what do you mean you just go in unprepared and you just say whatever's on the top of your head? I was at a place where I was being so careful in my life, and but I really wanted to try it, so I did. And improv is something where, like, like being unscripted is scary if you're feeling vulnerable in the world, right? And so I did that, and that led to stand-up comedy. And it's hard to make friends when you have a criminal record too. Like, if you think about it, like, I'm going to make a new friend, but I'm not going to tell you I have 32 felonies right away because, I'm scared to tell you, but then, you're not really having a close friendship because I don't know, I'm saying I was keeping people at a distance. And so it was a very lonely place to be. Like, I wanted connection with others, but I was very afraid of, them rejecting me if they found out my past. So I wrote a stand-up routine about getting a prison nickname, Mama Love. And I performed it, just in this small group stand-up class, and most of those improv people. And I did it in a safe way where it was just, a funny comedy routine. And then afterwards, the people I knew from improv came up, and one of them said, "Is that true?" And then a bunch of them said, was any of that true? And it was this decision moment, like, do I? And I just said yes. And I told them, and they were like, okay, cool. Want to go to lunch? Like, it was not like the big thing in my head that I thought it was. But I think that was the first step. I started getting a community, and, my shame just started healing in that community, in that connection, people knowing, like, the real me, and not, running, screaming, or whatever it was, so that was my community that I first built. And then, at work, telling, one author at a time a little bit, engage in the reaction. But it was really, I got out of jail in 2009. It was 2019 when I got on the TEDx stage in Santa Cruz. And, that's a good decade where I just lived in fear of people Googling me and finding that neighbor from hell headline. It was like my biggest fear. And, I was always on alert for that. And so I got on the stage, and I told everyone the biggest thing I was afraid they were finding out. And the lightness and freedom I felt after that was better than any drug I've ever taken, right? Like, it was just like, oh, this feels really good. Like, I just, why didn't I do this sooner is really what I thought, but it felt really good. But that stand-up comedy, that community, it was really community is really what helped me to get up there and do that.
No, I think that's, so important. And again, actually the recognition that when you show your vulnerability, people actually embrace you. They don't shun you.
Yeah.
And I gave a talk one time, and as you know, I can shed a tear. My voice can crack. And I was telling a story, and a woman came up to me afterwards, and she said to me, "Oh my God, I felt so bad for you up there. It must have been so embarrassing for you to say those things about yourself." And she said, "But I can help you." And I go, "Oh, really?" And she said, "I'm a psychiatrist and a hypnotherapist, and if you come to me for 3 sessions, I'll get rid of all of that for you." Which, of course, is, when you have that ability to be vulnerable, in some ways that becomes a superpower.
Yeah.
I mean, it liberates you. It gives you strength. And one of the things I want to go over is, I think, if you want to call it your first break, was when you were actually hired by Idea Architects. And what happened with that, but also the reality that somebody recognized your talent, recognized the pain, and was willing to accept you as you are and support you in your own redemption.
Yeah. So I answered a Craigslist ad to work part-time at a literary agency, and I was very desperate and frustrated and sad and just feeling hopeless that I could, how was I going to like rebuild my life and make money and support my family? And so I answered this ad, and the ad mentioned that the agency worked with Desmond Tutu. Excuse me. So, I halfway thought it was a serial killer ad, I was like, really? Is this a real thing? And I was actually in line appeal the decision to get food stamps and welfare, because if you have a drug charge, you can't get any cash welfare, forever. So, but I had to feed my son. And so I got the call to come interview like in an hour. And I was, in this moment, do I stay and try and get some food, or I just risk this, this potential job if it's real or not? So I decided to go and interview. And, I had my background in writing and working for a small press publisher before. So on paper, I looked very qualified for this job. And ID Architects hired me. Doug Abrams hired me. And he didn't ask me about my background. He didn't ask, I had a don't ask, don't tell policy, but I would have told him if he asked, but I wasn't going to volunteer it. And so it was really, I was there working a few weeks, immediately working collaboratively, writing a book and editing a tutu biography, and feeling so good because I'm good adjacent, first of all, right? And I'm doing really good work in the world. And like, it felt so good. Like I can do good things. And I remember I was sitting in his office. I didn't even have a desk yet. I was sitting in a chair, and he was on a phone call with, we did the book, What Color's Your Parachute? So they were revising that book and talking to the authors about how now people Google their employees. And so I guess while he was on that call, I didn't know that. I'll Google my new employee. And I remember like feeling the air change, and I looked in his face. He was staring at me across the room, and his face was white as a sheet, like, because he saw that neighbor from hell and identity theft and all of these things. And so he, hung up the phone and said, go home and come back tomorrow. I need to think about this. And I'll call your references. He had called the references. And so I left there, and I was like, I'll never come back here. Like, I can't. I was so like sad, and like, I was, but he had called me brilliant yesterday, and now I'm just this thing, and so I was like, I can't go back. There's no way I could face this and come back and talk to him. And so I had a long sleepless night, but I did go back, and the first thing I said was like, I'm sorry, if I put you in this position, it's important to me, I didn't lie to you. And he decided to take a chance. He said, I can't work with Desmond Tutu and not walk my talk. And I worked there for 12 years and, started a 5-hour-a-week part-time assistant to co-CEO. And, just one person believing in you, like I said earlier, like you rise to the occasion, you have no idea, like I didn't know what I was capable of. And I just needed one person to give me the opportunity to show myself what I was capable of.
Well, and I think that's such an important statement because, so many people will sit there and say, well, I don't have resources, I don't have the ability, I don't have access, I don't have money, and that's why I don't do X, Y, or Z. But everybody has the ability to change everyone or someone's life every day. And it's something that we should never forget. And whether it's giving somebody like you a chance, saying hello to somebody who is lonely, it's really, really important. And for myself, I've had experience where people have come up to me who, to be honest, sometimes I haven't even recognized. And they go, do you remember the time? And I don't. but they'll sit there and they'll say, that conversation changed my life. And you go, oh my God, just by that brief interaction, which frankly at that moment didn't seem it meant a whole lot, had the power to change somebody's life. And I have to also thank you for you working with me because, my book has changed literally tens of thousands of lives, if not more, of people who, being able to share a narrative, and I think this will be your book too, to share a narrative that's powerful, that's honest, that shows your vulnerability, but also defines a path towards redemption and how that changes you and it changes those around you. And it empowers so many people. It's extraordinary.
Thank you. Yeah. I hope, it's coming up soon. So I think everybody knows someone who's struggling if they're not struggling themselves. And I do hope that, you know, memoirs is the closest you can be in someone else's consciousness. You're looking at the world through their eyes. You're making their choices with them for good or bad. I've gotten some feedback. Some people were, yelling at me for some of the choices I made in my book. But I do think like it does hack empathy, any first person memoir, and some people, certain neighborhoods, I'm a cautionary tale still, like, this is what happens when soccer moms go bad. And other people who are struggling, who have shame, who, they might not have the same experiences, or they have a loved one it inspires them. And that's the hope for me.
No, well, I think you do that very well. So congratulations. But
thank you.
Before we end, probably the most important thing, which I meant to ask you, which I forgot, was I'd like you to tell us about your time running a pet cemetery.
There's like one line in the book, but I'm a very compassionate pet cemetery owner. Like I found I'm mama love wherever I go. I could be working at a pet cemetery and helping you through grief. I could be in jail next to you. And I have a lot of children, but I think, that's a whole other book.
Well, I want to just get some insights. First of all, how the hell do you become involved with the pet cemetery? And I guess probably I'm naive. I mean, certainly all of us have had pets who die, but I never thought of actually having a pet cemetery and, if you will, support services for those who are grieving over their pets in an organized fashion.
Yeah, well, it's actually, there's a whole extensive network of pet cemetery owners across the country. And, if you think about it, every veterinary hospital has to have be contracted with a pet cemetery or crematory. Mine was both, to help loved ones handle the remains of their babies, whichever way they choose. So, it's, actually I went to the International Association of Pet Cemetery Owners Convention, and it's actually where I ended up, I won't, it's where I can, my fourth son was conceived there. It was that exciting of an event. So, no.
I'm not even going to go with.
You might even want to cut that out, but But
yeah, okay.
It is legit. It's a real business, and there's a lot of
Wow,
you'd be surprised. It really is. It really is. Could be a whole other book, honestly.
Yeah, no, I find that fascinating. I actually had never thought of that. I mean, I can certainly understand it perhaps now, but you have to be licensed to do that?
Yeah, you have to be, you have to have a license for a crematorium, which I had, and, pet cemetery, like any business license. But, like in the county where I live, it's illegal to bury your your pet in your yard. So they have to have somewhere. And most people have cremated, with laser engraved boxes and, caskets. Like we did the biggest pet funeral I ever did was for a police canine that passed away. And there were 100, I was out there weeping. It was 100 police officers and canine dogs from around the state, and bagpipes and ceremony. And
wow.
It's the whole thing.
Well, for our listeners,
we've taken a turn. Yeah.
If you have a pet and are grieving,
don't call me. That's not my business. Do not call me.
Yeah, please email Laura for advice and direction in that regard. Forget the book. We're on pet cemetery.
Yeah, forget the book. Forget incarcerated women. I will help you with your goldfish.
Yes. Well, perhaps on that note, we can end our conversation. But Laura, I thank you so much for your time, and it's really an honor to call you my friend, and also it's actually joyous to see how far you've come, and also being able to tell your story and get the appropriate accolades for that. So, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much.
Again, thank you for being with us today. The Into the Magic Shop podcast can be found where you find your most popular podcasts, or you can find us at intothemagicshop.com.